Welcome back to another episode of the Supply Chaney podcast. I am your host, Nathan Chaney, and today we are talking with Claudia Freed, the president and CEO of EALgreen. And I've got to chat with her a couple of times as we've been preparing for this and getting to know each other. And I'm just thrilled to be able to bring her on. You know, I try to have each episode focus on a different part of supply chain. And today we're going to get to dive deep into sustainability, the circular economy, talk a little bit about careers, which we always do. And maybe who knows what else might get thrown in the kitchen sinks. Claudia, thanks for joining this morning. And can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
It's great to be with you and your audience. Thank you for inviting me to join you today. A little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Argentina, in the northeast part of Argentina, really near a river, near the Paraná River. So it's known as the Delta of Argentina. And the reason I mentioned that early on is because it really did shape who I am today, really the culture of where I come from, the geography, being so close to nature. I am the second of four daughters of a family that, as a lot of Argentinians are immigrants, both from, in my case, Italy and Spain. So I have that connection as well. And I have always been very interested in education and learning because I come from a family of educators. In fact, my grandfather was the first inspector of public schools when they needed to go around Argentina to inspect and audit little rural schools. And he will go in a horse to check out to make sure that education was being delivered. So from an early age, I knew the value of education. As I grew up, life took sad and unexpected turns. My father, who was the president of a university, unfortunately died very young. He was 42. I was 15 years old.
Wow.
And at that very vulnerable time in my life, I met an exchange student who was visiting Argentina from Pittsburgh. I had never seen an exchange student in my life. I didn't speak English. I had lived a fairly sheltered life, if you like, because we lived in a rural area where I went to elementary school and primary school in a lab school. So my father was the president of a university, and we grew up on that campus. So meeting an exchange student from Pittsburgh was like meeting somebody from another planet.
Yeah.
And it at that moment, it sparked the interest in me to learn more about what's it like to be from another country and to visit. So that initiated at age 15 a quest for wanting to become an exchange student myself. I was able to work with an organization called Youth for Understanding, whose role is to create cultural exchange programs between South America and the U.S. and Europe and the U.S. This organization placed me as an exchange student with a family in Lafayette, Indiana. And at age 16 by that time, I flew in from Argentina to Indianapolis on February 1st. This was 1981. Never seen snow for the first time, coming to the United States. So beginning to understand the fact that I was here for an exchange student program, my American family showed me what the United States is all about. I learned the culture. I learned a little bit about English. But it was time for me to go back at the end of the 6 months. In Argentina, with the bit of English that I had learned, I began to look for what was going to happen to the rest of my life. And I always wanted to be a doctor. My dream was to be a hematologist. As a young child, I was not well. I had lots of issues with asthma and needed to visit the doctor frequently. And I developed an admiration for the profession. The funny thing is that many years later, I now have been married to a doctor for 25 years. So I did get that opportunity to be close to the profession. But when I went back to Argentina, I was working for a neurologist that had bought the first CAT scan machine for the little clinic where they worked. And my job was to try to translate some of the manuals. So throughout my career, I have been very entrepreneur in taking opportunities to do very different things. And the American family that had hosted me as an exchange student invited me to come back to the United States because they saw that I could probably thrive in an environment where opportunity was made available to me and not At that time in Argentina, this is 1980, we had just gone through a political upheaval and opportunities were very limited. So David and Sharon Hill, who became my American parents, supported me and sponsored me to come back to the United States. I entered Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana, with the idea that in West Lafayette, I would thrive. Well, the story was going to be much more challenging than anyone expected because I didn't speak English well enough. I didn't understand the education system in college, GPA, classes, counselors. And after 6 months of that experience, I told my American mom that I was going back home, that I felt like I had failed. And she was very wise and said, I think your problem is the language, Claudia. If you learn to speak English, you will do okay. Give yourself a summer and we will help you learn a little bit of language. And if you do feel that you need to go back to Argentina, we will help you go home. And that summer changed my life because it was during that summer I became an exchange student helper at a summer camp in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is not too far from here, from Chicago, where I met the founders and the visionaries that created the concept of EAL, which today is called EALgreen. But those entrepreneurs were in a very important point in my life where they had just started EAL as a concept, and they decided that they needed to have the first donor, the first college, and the first student that will try out this concept that they had. When they invited me to come to Chicago, because their first scholarship was granted at North Park University, I literally said, my bag and I will come. And I arrived in Chicago in 1982 with a duffel bag. And that is how my story begins, in my connection to EAL, the mission of this model, the entrepreneurs that created it, and a transformational journey that it's the reason why I'm speaking to you today. So that's a little bit about how I started.
I like to tell people I'm just a boring Texan. There's millions of us. But I get to actually participate in this story a little bit myself because my wife, similar to you, is born and raised in Brazil, came to the US to do a work exchange, to learn the language and learn English, and ended up planting a flag here, right? And so I feel fortunate to be able to see a little bit that perspective of what it's like to not be a native-born American and make a life here, right? So I'm excited to hear the next chapter of your story. So you want to continue?
Yes.
Sure.
So the story of EAL really starts at that moment where there are a couple of friends, entrepreneurs, that were in their early 40s, and they decided not if they became successful, but when they became successful, they were going to find a way to pay it forward, to give back to the society and to community a gift that had been given to them. Under very different circumstances, both friends had gone to college on a scholarship. And as their careers began to take hold, they were both in the sales world. One was a chemical engineer and the other one a master salesperson. They decided that they saw an opportunity. At the time, and this is again in 1980, the concept of excess inventory, supply chains, certainly reverse logistics, circular economy, those are very, very early on in that process. In fact, in the 1950s, there was a book that was written about the responsibility, the corporate responsibility of the businessman. So that's a book that really pioneers this concept of corporate social responsibility. Mm-hmm. And Sweet Roscom and Dan Michelson, who are the two friends that got together, saw that there was an opportunity to go beyond the financial metrics. Yes, there is an issue with supply chain. And how they discovered that was that as they were going into the various customer facilities, warehouses, and college campuses, they spotted a problem on the one side and an opportunity on the other. Mm-hmm. The problem was that colleges and universities had very limited budgets, but they had beautiful campuses and they didn't have the funding to buy the equipment that they needed. On the other hand, they were going into corporate settings, warehouses, distribution centers, and those colleagues were complaining that boxes were on the way, that the supply chain wasn't going fast enough. And they began to see that there was an accumulation of excess inventory. They sat down And they said, what if we created an opportunity where we actually transfer the excess surplus materials from corporate donors onto campuses of colleges and universities? And the brilliant move was, how do you monetize? How do you create value from that exchange? And the model that we still adhere to today, 43 years later, is that we are able to transfer donated products to college campuses in exchange for a scholarship. So when a college saves money on their operating budget, that funds scholarships for students. I was the first student that went through that process. And what I love to think about, Nathan, is that many, many times in life, we don't really understand yet that we are the protagonist, that we are inside the story. And many times we underestimate the value of being the first one in line to try a new idea. Their spirit of being innovators and the spirit of understanding that they were there to solve a problem was what really started the concept of EAL. It started out as Assistance Limited. They really, truly wanted to save the world. And it was in 1985, just about the time that I graduated from North Park, they went to the trade office and said, we need to expand the name and we're going to call ourselves Educational Assistance Limited. So in 1985, when I graduated from college with the first ever scholarship that was created from this exchange, I graduated from North Park University, at that time was North Park College, with a degree in economics and a minor in computer science. Today, I apply many of the principles of critical thinking and problem solving from having lived that educational journey. My first opportunity after graduating from North Park was the first 10 years of my life I spent in financial trading. I worked again for another set of entrepreneurs. And I think you and I have talked about what we learned from people that come along our way in the journey of our experience as professionals. I learned a great many lessons in my early career at an organization called Chicago Research and Trading. And they were pioneers in the trading of financial futures and options. So I learned about financial markets, about funding, about risk management in the first 10 years of my life in that role. I switched from having been in the financial services area to consulting for the Chicago Public Schools. There was a tremendous interest in blending government and social services to begin to address issues of supply chain efficiencies and inefficiencies. And in particular, we did a number of studies at the Chicago Public Schools about supply deliveries to high schools. Mm-hmm. And while I was doing the consulting for the Chicago Public Schools, the board of directors of EALgreen, at that time was called EAL, sought me out. They said, we have been monitoring and following your career all these years, and we believe that you are now ready to come and join EAL as their first female executive director. Mm-hmm. And that is how I started my journey here at EAL.
There is, I feel like, I think circular economy and circular sort of business is a big topic for you. But I think that your life in general is a good example of this circular, something that was planted a long time ago returns back and has a benefit again in another life. What about, I think I remember you trying to learn Japanese or something at some point in your career?
The Japan experience was very, very interesting because as a woman and as a mom, it did have an impact on my life, the fact that I was starting a family. And it was during my early years at CRT, Chicago Research and Trading, again, a set of pioneers and visionaries. CRT was blending a new technique to buy and sell options in the market, lots of formulas and the Black-Scholes model. So they had a product, and it was important for them to expand globally. At the time, we were considering a joint venture with Mitsubishi Trust and Banking Corp. And there was an advanced team that was going to be going ahead to set up their CRT office in Tokyo. And naturally, as a global thinker and as an immigrant already, speaking a number of languages, there was an affinity to say, okay, Claudia, we invite you to be part of that team. Unfortunately, even though we studied Japanese and prepared culturally, which was so important, the federal government at that time, this is in the very early 90s, did not approve the merger between the two entities. And that opportunity dissolved, and the joint venture never happened. But it did allow me to have an additional opportunity to learn a language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, as you talk about your background, and we'll dig into a little bit more about EALgreen and what you all do on a day-to-day basis, but it's you know, as I'm actually in an ethics course right now, working in my MBA classes, and I literally last night was reading about sustainability, part of ESG, and there's, you know, there's kind of this case that there is a financial case for sustainability and ESG causes and all these green practices, and I think that you seem to be well equipped to speak both to the financial side of it from a markets perspective and on a high level economics perspective, but also on the sustainability of it all. Can you talk a little bit more about
Sure.
the intersection of those two?
I love the question because it highlights the complexity of the problem, the complexity of how we are moving toward, on the one hand, all the progress that has been made, both to give affordability and access to higher education, for example, and really the impact both on that growth. If you just look at a small segment, for example, the retail market, how it has grown since I came to this country. It's been a phenomenal growth. I think that there is a $5.1 trillion that is now the National Retail Federation looks at the size of the retail market. And you imagine what it does to the economy and to the environment. On the other hand, there are 55 million people in the United States that work in retail. So on the one level, if we think about the impact on sustainability, supply chain, the economy, when we think about the overconsumption, which is why that retail market has grown so significantly, it is complex because it is also a place where people are earning a living. Yeah. So it's really about understanding the dynamics between reuse, repurpose, recycling, and the concept of sustainability, as your audience probably very well knows, in particular about the circular economy, was really coined by Dane MacArthur. So Ellen MacArthur puts on the map this concept of taking the linear economy, which is we make, we use, we waste, we throw away, to the circularity of these systems, the circularity of economy. Are there ways in which we make, we use, but then don't go to the waste cycle? Find at least 9 or 10 other activities that will bring this concept of waste into repurpose, redesign, reuse, recycle, resale, repair. So when we begin to think about that, and when I started to understand the EAL model within that context, it became very organic to me. It became very natural to me. On the one level, because it is innovative and I am attracted to people who think big ideas and are pioneers. But secondly, because it has really practical implications. I am living proof that when you give someone an opportunity, such as to go to a college and get a degree, and when you put them to work for good people doing good things, that base of that idea that this was started because a company named W.W. Granger donated 2 motors that were given to a college, that created a scholarship was given to me. When you begin to internalize and make that part of who you are, it's impossible not to become sensitized or be more sensitive to ideas of sustainability waste. So that which became, I would say that was the basis for my then more intellectual interest in where does this concept come from? What are its principles? How do you get it done correctly? Very similar to almost the dialogue that is going on with AI, another enormous innovation. The principles of how does it fit in today's society? What are its benefits? What are the risks? So for me, it has been a journey for the last 42 years to understand that EAL is a pioneer in this concept of circular economy, that we have a tremendous impact on the concept of sustainability, which is truly the simple way to describe it is that you must look at every system beyond the financial metrics. When we look at things beyond the financial metrics, we begin to see what we don't see. We begin to see the impact on the planet. We begin to see the impact on people. And that is, I think, the magic of EAL.
Gotcha. Thanks for sharing the story about Granger and Two Motors back then. Can you give an example today of what a transaction or facilitation or what it looks like today there at EALgreen on a day-to-day basis?
It's a great question because it is a fun place where we are driving purpose all day long. We drive purpose because we know that whatever we do is going to change the life of thousands of students. And in fact, I believe that we are at around 24,000 students that have come after the first
one.
So for us, it's a joy and it's a tremendous pride every day to know that while most businesses in the United States sunset between 3 and 5 years because they don't survive, small businesses, restaurants and entrepreneurs, it's very difficult to run a business for 42 years. I have a fantastic team and that's how we do it, and a great board. But having the idea that at EAL, any day we may be presented with an opportunity. So a typical day at EAL is that if we think of a college or a university as a small city, think about there is an electricity system, there's a plumbing system, there is construction, groundskeeping, health. So donations that fit into the college catalog, if you will, are donations that can assist on everything from floor mats that are helping to keep the campus safe in the snow or salt, to tents, to sporting equipment. We don't really place any products on college campuses that are directly in the hands of the students. So we actually do just industrial and infrastructure. So that's our sweet spot. Again, with the concept that it's circular. Somebody can use it. There's got to be a better way than just sending it to the landfill. And that's our most critical asset, is the mindset. The mindset that someone can use it. The problem with that mindset is that it requires a little bit of extra effort, and it requires that somebody is willing to make a small sacrifice at one point. And I'll give you an example. When those two motors went to North Park College, the sacrifice that the college made was that the motors may have had a small scratch or a small dent. They were not getting it shining, spanking new, like out of the box. But they had the generosity in their hearts to say, it doesn't really matter. It's perfectly functional.
Right.
The snowblower, the golf cart that can help us go from campus to campus, to site to, trim the bushes before the spring conference comes. It's all about providing that safe and beautiful environment for students to learn. And that's why we think about a regular day at EAL is what is going to help accomplish the mission.
Gotcha. And a little bit on the industrial side, which I think that a lot of people hear a lot about fast fashion and how, I just watched a YouTube video about the average American 20 years ago bought 8 or 10 new pairs of clothes, clothing items in a year. And now it's at, I think they said like 64. The average American buys 64 new garments every year. And so just the use and the cheapness of things and how easy it is to come by material items, there's just so much excess and waste at the end of that. And we see that and we hear a lot about it in the media because of on the consumer side, but not so much on the industrial side. Can you talk a little bit about on the industrial side, is there a similar phenomenon or, of there being this excess?
That's a really interesting question. So if we talk for a moment about the retail and the fast fashion, um, we are all sadly familiar with heaps of clothing. If you fly to, when you go back to South America, perhaps you can take the trip that takes you from the United States via Chile and come across, from the West. You will fly over the desert and you will see literally from the plane heaps of things, and you're like, is that a mountain? No, that's clothing. Yeah. So the problem is enormous. It's very huge. And that's on the retail side for clothing. I would suggest that anyone that is interested in looking at that issue more closely, follow what the National Retail Federation, Scott Case, Tony Sirota from the Reverse Logistics Association, they're doing a very good job putting that issue on the map and talking about solutions. On the industrial side, the issue of excess inventory or surplus materials is different. The rate of returns of things like tools and snowblowers is not really the cause of the excess materials. It tends to be more an alignment of things that go deeper, is the manufacturing. So when you have products that are being manufactured overseas, and then there is a change in consumer behavior on specs, standardization, regulation, all of those that tend to be more policy related may create an unintended consequence of you have a wholesale distributor with products on their hands and the manufacturer doesn't want it back. So what do? You either abandon it, and I know that Abby talked about this a little bit in her podcast. Okay. You abandon the inventory, which again, if you're thinking circularity, it's doing absolutely nothing for other than adding cost. And the longer you sit on inventory, the more costly it will become for you to get rid of it. And that is regardless of the product. Because the idea that you can just hide it, it will go away, absolutely not happening. So that's why landfills, the idea is to eliminate new landfills from beginning. So get the landfills that you have already in your community, in your country, in your region to become more efficient. But let's try not to start more of those, because that is really a losing proposition. So on the industrial side, we don't have the problem of the magnitude at the scale of the retail products or clothing. The issue is more about attacking efficiency. While it's very well known, if you look at any of the wholesale distribution and magazines that deal with inventory management, of course, every business has to have a prudent amount, especially when you are in an industrial or scientific environment. You need to have your well-stocked or your ability to get to that stock very quickly. And we learned that during COVID and the supply chain disruption. In the medical field, as I said, Mark is a pediatrician, and things related to vaccine supply. So the complexity of the industrial supply chain is very different than anything else that we are able to talk. Even on the food supply chain. So when you are talking about industrial, it is the tools, the equipment, the trucks that you need to support a well-functioning supply chain for the other sectors of the economy. And for us, when we think about surplus materials in the industrial sector, we think about hand tools so that college and a university can fix a plumbing problem so that the students can go back to class on Monday. If they have a frozen pipe, if they don't have the right tools, the cascading effect of not having a functioning facility is very real. So in the industrial sector, what causes excess inventory could be a number of things, but mostly is trying to keep that supply chain from becoming as lean and as fast as possible and avoiding waste. Supply chain professionals hate to see things go to waste. Sure. And that's a blessing.
Sure. It's a good step in the right direction for sure. Kind of a built-in mindset. one question that I try to ask all my guests is to put themselves kind of back in the place of a student today that's in business school. And clearly you speak with many of them and you have a big impact on many. If for those students that wanted to be in the supply chain world and maybe in the position someone like you to be able to make a difference and use these supply chain smarts for the greater good. What advice might you give them, or do you give them? Because again, I imagine you interface with them a lot.
It's a good question. And now, as I am, next month will be my 62nd birthday, so I now get to be the one that has the wise hairs, right? So I get to give a lot of advice, and there are two things. One is entirely how I look at the world and how I look at my own experience. And that is that it is said that it's very important to know yourself or to know ourselves. But what I would really add is that in order to be successful in life, a young person should look at two things: know yourself, but also, as I say now, know yourself and believe in yourself. The idea of knowing ourselves, I'm a second daughter, so we are independent, we are competitive, we like challenges, we have to be individualistic because we were the second one. So knowing about who you really are and believing in yourself. Had I believed in my ability to work well in this country, in this society, in the business world earlier on, I may have done different things. The second thing that I would say to a young person is actually something that I learned in 2018. I was invited by the government of China to speak in Guangzhou to a group of 10,000 business women. I mean, we don't think about China and entrepreneurship in the sector, but I was invited to speak. And one of the items that I researched before I spoke, which was an amazing experience, was what is a role model in the entrepreneurship world in China. And of course, I came across the profile of Jack Ma, who is the co-founder and owner of Alibaba. He's now retired. I think he went back to teaching. But there's a very interesting interview Jack Ma gives many years ago to the World Economic Forum, in which he said, what was his journey? He was asked the same question. And he goes back into time and said, when we are young and we get the opportunity to study something that we love, we may get a job doing what we love. If you are able to be successful in that job, you may end up having your career. Later on, that's your profession. But only when you are able to give back, that's when you reach the level of your legacy. And so how do we look at our life throughout our careers? What he said is, if you want to get to that point of legacy, you have to do a couple of things. And one of the things that he insists, and I have adopted that as part of my own mantra, not only know yourself and believe in yourself, and find a good person to work for, beyond a good product, beyond a company, beyond equal pay, beyond life-work balance. The most important thing in his success was to find the right person to work for, somebody that is a good individual, that has ethics, that is going to give you opportunities. They will open doors. They will place you in a position where, of course, you have to work really hard, but without working for a good person, you are in an uphill battle.
Then quick question for you, because there are so many college students that are out there and everyone looking for jobs. Do you have a litmus test or something that to know that the person that you're talking to and that's interviewing you fits this good person title?
It's really a great question. I think it's a very important question as we do all of this without the benefit of the whole human being being present in the communication. One of the sweet, important little books that I love to read, and one of the things that I read recently is called Lincoln's Sword, Sword. I have to say it carefully because my daughters have said, Mom, the SW sound is kind of funky when you say it, so you have to spell it. But in that book, which was authored by a professor at Knox College. We learn about the art of communicating and conveying your values through your entire persona. We don't have that as much now that we are doing everything through a monitor and a speaker. But I think that there are a couple of things that are pretty important in understanding. First of all, it's very it's a basic thing to understand. Is the person giving you an opportunity? Do they have their own track record? Yeah, on LinkedIn, you can find out, are these individuals that have been hopping from job to job, where maybe it may indicate, again, I'm not a psychologist, but what you want is consistency. You want somebody who has lived that experience of maybe coming up in the business world themselves. So it's more about when you get to meet that person, if possible, get them to tell you a little bit about their journey. Did they come through in a way in which you come through in life? What are the things you have in common with them? Can you align to really go to battle? I'm a nonviolent person, so when I say that, I mean, are you going to be willing to give it your everything you've got to align and advocate and fight for the right goals? And that says a lot about the human side of the person that you may go to work. In fact, the reason that Jack Ma talks about the working for a good person, he did give an example. And his example was that when he graduated from university, he grabbed his little briefcase, he put on his fancy clothes, and he was heading out to the business world. And his economics professor tapped him in the shoulder and said, Jack, where are you going? I'm going into the business world. And he said, no, you're going to come and teach alongside with me. You will teach first, because when you teach, you develop the potential in other people. And that single principle is where you can also educate someone on that selection process. Are they teachers or are they takers? Are they willing to give you their time? Are they willing to share with you what made them successful? And that story with Jack Ma arcs back to the end of his legacy, because when he left Alibaba, he went back to teaching. And so that experience of having worked for a good person, which is the story of how do we become successful, can serve as an example for young people to be inspired, to look for who do they really want to be hanging out with? Who do they want to really have exciting, yes, we got it. We got the snowblower. We got the golf cart. We're going to transform the lives of students. Or when things don't go well, and believe me, sometimes things don't go well, you really need to have a team that can trust you, that you are going to be able to guide them through, getting them through to the other side when things don't go well.
Yeah, that resilience.
Yes.
Well, I think that you almost made a little quick teaser for maybe podcast number 2, and we can talk about some of these difficult struggles and failures. But for today, I think that we covered a lot of ground just talking about your history. And again, on this podcast, I really want to just highlight the interesting and inspiring stories of people that are in supply chain. And I think that you are the quintessential example of that. So I appreciate you coming on today and sharing some of that. And maybe we'll have a part 2 one day.
That would be fantastic. And I would say that in the spirit of sharing who I am and what I have done, it's intrinsically tied to the EAL business model, which is so inspiring every day. And I encourage even your students to have a look, to have me come and talk to them, because it is an important message, a complicated model that deserves attention. And I am just so grateful to be able to tell you more about it.
Amazing. Well, have a great rest of the week. Stay warm up there in Chicago. I think it's a little chilly these days. And I'll see you around.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Have a great day.